A deeply disturbing story out of the West Midlands is raising a question that should make every parent, every teacher, and every public official stop in their tracks. Were warnings about children being exploited in plain sight ignored for years? According to reporting published on Friday, concerns about child sexual abuse linked to mini-marts in Dudley go back as far as 10 years. And some of the children mentioned in those reports were said to be as young as 11. Now let's be very clear from the start. These are reported allegations and safeguarding concerns. They are not the same thing as a court judgment. They are not the same thing as a completed criminal case. But when a story says warnings were raised over and over again, over the course of years, involving children this young, that alone demands serious scrutiny. Because if these reports are accurate, then this is not just a crime story. It is potentially a story about missed warnings, failed protection, and a system that may not have acted fast enough. And what makes this even more alarming is that there was already separate reporting earlier this month pointing to the same broader danger. Channel 4 News reported from Dudley that trading standards officers had become increasingly concerned that some rogue vape shops and mini-marts were not just breaking retail laws, but could also be connected to the exploitation of vulnerable children. In that report, Dudley's principal trading standards officer said his team had received complaints suggesting that vapes and other illegal goods were, in some cases, being offered to children in exchange for sexual favors. The same report said officers were aware of illegal vape sales to children as young as 11 and that Dudley's team had shut down nearly 40 rogue vape shops and mini-marts over the previous year. Think about that for a second. This is not a story about one bad shopkeeper selling the occasional vape to a teenager. This is a story about the possibility that some businesses on ordinary high streets, places people walk past every day, may have become part of an environment where children were being targeted, groomed, and put at risk. Not hidden in some faraway criminal underworld. Not behind a dramatic movie-style operation. But potentially right there on the high street, in places that look normal from the outside. And that may be why this story hits so hard. Because the most frightening threats are often the ones that blend in. A convenience store. A mini-mart. A vape shop. A place where a young person can walk in unnoticed. A place where adults may not ask too many questions. A place where a child can be offered something small, a vape, cigarettes, alcohol, attention, a free item, a favor, and where that small thing becomes the first step into something much darker. That pattern is what makes grooming so dangerous. It often does not begin with obvious violence. It begins with access, with familiarity, with gifts, with secrecy, with adults spotting something is wrong only after the child has already been pulled into harm. And that is why the timeline matters. If warnings really were being raised for close to a decade, then the central issue is no longer just what may have happened inside those shops. The issue becomes, what was done when concerns first surfaced? Who received those reports? How were they assessed? Were children identified and protected? Were premises investigated? Were cases linked together? Or did the concerns remain fragmented, treated as isolated incidents instead of signs of a bigger pattern? Those are the questions that matter now. Because public trust does not depend on authorities claiming to care after a scandal reaches the headlines. Public trust depends on whether they acted before the headlines. And to understand the wider backdrop here, it is worth looking at what West Midlands Police itself has said publicly in a related context. In a county lines crackdown announced on the 13th of March, 2026, the force said criminal gangs across the region exploit children and vulnerable adults, and that safeguarding remained a top priority during enforcement activity. Police said dozens of young people were safeguarded from exploitation during that operation. So no one can seriously argue that child exploitation tied to organized criminality is some imaginary threat. The police themselves have publicly described exploitation of children by gangs as a real and current danger in the West Midlands. Which brings us back to Dudley. If one part of the system is saying rogue shops and mini-marts may be a frontline for exploitation, and another part of the system is warning that criminal networks are exploiting children across the region, then the public is entitled to ask whether the dots were joined quickly enough. That is not sensationalism. That is accountability. And accountability matters especially in cases involving children, because children do not have the power adults do. They depend on institutions to notice risk, to share intelligence, and to intervene before harm escalates. When that fails, the damage is not abstract. It is human. It is permanent for some victims. And it leaves communities asking the same painful question over and over again: how was this allowed to happen? Now, there is another reason this story needs careful handling. Stories like this can easily be twisted into rumor, outrage farming, or sweeping claims that go beyond the evidence. That helps nobody, least of all victims. So the responsible position is this: take the allegations seriously. Take the reporting seriously. Demand answers. But do not pretend that unanswered questions are already proven findings. There is a difference between saying, "This happened exactly as alleged," and saying, "The reporting raises urgent questions that authorities now need to answer in full." That second position is the right one, because the story, as it stands, is already serious enough. Reports involving children as young as 11. Warnings said to stretch back years. Separate reporting about rogue shops, illegal sales to children, and exploitation concerns. And a public need for clarity on who knew what and when. So here are the questions that now matter most. How many warnings were raised? Who received them? What action followed? Were children protected? Were any shops shut down specifically because of exploitation concerns? And if reports were circulating for years, why did the public only learn the scale of those concerns now? Until those questions are answered properly, this story is not going away. Because if children were being endangered in plain sight, then this is not just another shocking headline. It is a test of whether the people and institutions meant to protect the vulnerable were actually doing so. And if they were not, then the public deserves the truth in full.